Education, Youth and Information, Mr. Keith Duncan, President of the PSOJ, Dr. Kassan Troop, Chief Education Officer Acting, and other senior officers in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Mrs. Amiga Breeze McNabb, PSOJ Executive Director, other government and private sector representatives and members of the public who have joined us virtually, members of the media, welcome to our event this evening. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to a very engaging and timely and on-time event. The transformation of our education system and the sustainable development of our human capital are areas that the PSOJ and I personally are passionate about. We look forward to hearing the presentation from our Minister Williams. But to start this evening, we invite the President of the PSOJ, Mr. Keith Duncan, to deliver the opening remarks. Mr. Duncan.
Good evening, everyone. Honorable Minister Fayval Williams, Dr. Grace McLean, Vice President Mariam, Amiga Breeze McNabb, Executive Director, we put her under a whole lot of pressure, along with Clearline Daly Mouchet. Lots of pressure. She don't get the pressure yet, but she's getting it. Other government and private sector representatives, friends from the Ministry of Education, members of the private sector who are online, members, associate companies, members of the public who are online, greetings. Members of the media, thank you for joining. And I think today, as Mariam has said, is a very timely conversation with us having, in the middle of a pandemic, having now to prepare ourselves for back to school, in the middle of a pandemic where we have new variants, the Delta variant that's out there, in the middle of a pandemic when our vaccination levels are not where we want them to be, but we know we have vaccines coming in tomorrow, on Friday, over 300,000 from the UK, so we're on a path. Everybody is giving up their best. Everyone is giving up their best, but how do we get the outcomes that we want as a country and be able to move our country to the levels that we know we can, as a country, manifest our true potential as a country? And that's what we're all about. And we're all about partnership in working together with the government of Jamaica, with the public sector, with the civil society, with the various ministries in a constructive relationship to move Jamaica forward. Now, we can always advocate and we can always jump on a soapbox and make noise, or we can work together constructively. Not to say that we don't allow ourselves the room to be able to hold our government, our private sector, civil society accountable, but at the same time, we must always work together as a people and as a country. You know, over many years, we have had many committees who have looked at education, the transformation of education, you know, I think from Maxine Henry Wilson when she was Minister of Education, through the Honorable Prime Minister when he was Minister of Education, you know, and so forth and so forth. We have always studied the problem and said, where are we going with our country? How are we going to improve our education outcomes? How do we make education more relevant to the global economy? Where are we going? Where do we fit? You know, how do we, you know, close the skills gap? How do we meet the needs of the private sector? How do we increase productivity of our people? How do we really get our students to the place where we really want them to be, to increase productivity, grow economy, prosperity for our people, which is driven by education? You know, and this is a key area of focus for the private sector, as we must equip our workforce, our people, to be able to meet the needs of a fast-changing global environment. We know what's going on with our rapidly digitizing global economy. The jobs of today require advanced and technical skills. We require a workforce that are critical thinkers, financially literate, have a grasp of technology. You know, and the funny thing is, and the facts are, is that we've been spending the money. Over 6% of our GDP, comparable to our peers in the region and globally, of our GDP goes towards education. It's the highest behind the Ministry of Finance. And we have been spending per capita in terms of students, and we're not necessarily seeing the outcomes that we want. We all have you know, where Jamaica is coming from, we have historically, we have a different perspective, and we may be moving up the curve, but we are not where we want to be. And I don't think it's for a lack of commitment of our educational infrastructure and our teachers and our education ministry. It is a matter of how do we pull all the pieces together to generate outcomes that we want as a country, high quality outcomes. And I believe that the Prime Minister would have been very seized with that when he named the Education Transformation Commission under the leadership of Professor Orlando Patterson to review and assess our education system and to recommend an action plan for change. The PM has said that education is the great socio-economic equalizer, and the country's focus must be on education, and we at the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica are totally aligned with this view. We believe that an educated and trained workforce will increase the incomes of our citizens, drive purchasing power, drive demands for goods and services, create greater value-added jobs, which means greater GDP growth, which means higher incomes for our people, which means more spending power for our peoples, so that they can spend and drive our domestic economy and drive GDP in higher value-added jobs, moving away from low-skilled jobs to high value-added jobs. That's where we need to go as a country. But when we look at where we are as a country at this point in time, and we look at our workforce, and there are over 2 million people that are eligible to be in our workforce. 1.3 million people have said that they will join our workforce, and they are engaged in our workforce. Of that 1.3 million people, approximately 10% are unemployed, which leaves about approximately 1.2 million people in our workforce. Of the 2 million who are eligible for our workforce, there are 791,000 people that are outside of our workforce. Some people call them unattached. Of that, there are 561,000 people who have not offered themselves for employment. That means there are 500,000 people out on the street not offering themselves for employment. These statistics are very startling, but they are real. And if we're going to really assess ourselves as a country and see where we are, we have to take all of these numbers, statistics into account, because they're not statistics, they're people. There are people that are out there that need to be transformed and moved into productive engagement. Now, of the 1.3 million people, or the 1.2 that are employed, 65% of our workforce is without training and certification. Therefore, if 65% of our workforce is without certification and training, how are we going to move the needle in terms of moving people to high value-added jobs if they're not trained? So we have our work cut out for us as a country. And I know that the Ministry of Education, because I know the new Minister of Education is one for change and transformation, and she's willing to go hard. Right? We know that, right? Go hard. You understand what I'm saying? And I know that she's focused around this. And I believe with the support of private sector, civil society, and everyone, that we can get there. But we need that plan, and we need to understand. We know that the Ministry of Education has a plan. We would like to hear that today, to understand how we move forward as a country. We know what our baseline situation is, but how do we move forward as a country? How do we make these changes now as a people, you know? We know that our people are resilient, because if them never resilient, them couldn't survive all of this, right? In a economy that had low growth for many years. When we compare ourselves to our regional, our peers in the region, Trinidad and Barbados have a per capita GDP of over 3 times that of Jamaica. Jamaica's output per person, employed person, is 20,000 US, while our peers are at 40,000. That's a DR, and Barbados, Trinidad is over at 68,000. So productivity has been declining, and our output per person is low. So that is our baseline situation, and we have work to do. So we're looking forward to hearing from the minister today to hear how she's going to take us forward, and also we want to hear about back to school too, because everybody is concerned about back to school, because we know our children have been out, and we know that parents, even that impacts productivity of the country, because parents have to be home with their children. So how do we get our children back to school inside of this environment that we are in with this pandemic? So the ministry has been very much focused around this, and I know that they have been very much focused around getting connectivity to the schools. And we are here to support you, Minister, and the team, Grace, Dr. Troop, and the entire Ministry of Education. And we're just saying it's all about positive, constructive relationships, but we need to name it and say where we are and how we move forward and support each other to get Jamaica to where we can get to manifest our greatness as a country. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for agreeing to have this forum today, this conversation. And thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Keith, for that comprehensive overview and for sharing PSOJ's thoughts on education, and for also raising those provocative questions. As we all know, education is a key ingredient to the sustainable growth of our country. So now I'd like to invite the Honorable Fayval Williams, Minister of Education, Youth and Information, to deliver her special presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by acknowledging the Honorable Nestor Morgan, our State Minister at the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, our Permanent Secretary, Dr. Grace McLean, our Chief Education Officer, Dr. Kassan Troop, and the entire team at the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Let me acknowledge as well Mr. Keith Duncan, President, Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, Mrs. Mariam Robinson, Vice Chair also of the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, all the members of that organization as well, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I hope I'm not missing anyone, good afternoon. So I want to thank the President, Mr. Duncan, for engaging me in conversation one day about this topic and making the suggestion that the ministry should visit with the PSOJ to talk a bit about the education sector and how we go forward from here. What are the plans? What are the dates around those plans? What are our expectations? And so here we are today, engaging you in a conversation to discuss not only the long term in terms of how we raise the achievement levels of our students, but also in the near term, as in the next school year, which begins in September. What are the plans? And so we will begin in terms of how this presentation is laid out. We will talk about the present, what exists. We'll talk about the plans, how we're going to achieve it. And then hopefully in all of that, you will have quite a bit of insight into the education sector, and then we can engage in question and answer. So I believe that the single most important question for Jamaica at this moment is how are we going to raise achievement levels in our education sector? And I asked that question, and I put that forward, because if we look at where we are today, I do not be satisfied with these results. So this would be the achievement levels for mathematics for our recent grade 6 cohort. And as you can see, these are the achievement levels: beginning, developing, proficient, highly proficient, the number of students who sat the exam, and then you can see what percentage. And as you can see in the proficient and highly proficient levels, we have less than, what we have, 37.7% of our students in terms of mathematics. And these are our students who are transitioning to high school. And this is just a different representation to just let you see graphically what it looks like. In terms of language arts, kind of the same achievement levels: beginning, developing, proficient, highly proficient. Better results in language arts, but still not where we should be comfortable with. So you can see in the proficient and highly proficient levels, we have about 56.4% of our students who are proficient. And again, this is a graphical representation. If you compare the subjects, mathematics, language arts, you can see right away that we are mathematics. And if we drill down a little bit more, looking at male versus female, you can see the stark difference. In the beginning group, there are twice as many males as there are females. And you can see as we go along what's the performance there. And it's important to segregate this by male versus female, because in our schools, we are encouraging our schools to kind of pull out our boys from time to time in the various subject areas. And again, this is the performance for mathematics, again, comparing it male versus females. And you can see, again, our female students are doing better than our male students. All right, so that was mathematics and language arts. If we drill down a little bit further, numeracy. Numeracy means kind of simple, I don't know, PS, you want to say just the beginning maths, basic maths. What you will see that at that level, mastery in numeracy is 74.4%, and in literacy it's 83.5%. So our children are mastering literacy and numeracy, but then at the higher levels of mathematics and language arts, we're seeing where it's not translating into higher marks there. And that is important information for me when I look at this, because it gives me a direction in which to go, and I'll talk about that. The numeracy just compares the male versus female. Same trend. Literacy, again, male versus female, the same trend. You can see our females outperform. I think we can go on, please. All right. All right, this is at CSEC level, which is high school. So in mathematics, 2019, only 54.6% of our students passed mathematics. In 2020, it was a little bit better, 55.6%. And in English A and English B, they make a distinction, better results there at high school. So what can we do to be higher achieving? What are the missings? What are the hurdles? What are the corrective measures? What is the plan? What are the time frames? What impact should we expect? These are some of the questions that we have to ask. Keith, you mentioned some of this data that's collected by the World Bank and that I used extensively in my sectoral. The investment in education has been high relative to our GDP. And even when we compare with Caribbean small states, which is the gray line, and Jamaica is the blue, you can see that consistently we have invested in our education system relative to our GDP and relative to what other countries do. If you look at us compared beyond the Caribbean to other countries like Singapore, Estonia, OECD countries, you can see as well that we compare favorably. This is as a percentage of our budget, not just our GDP, but as a percentage of our budget. We are the largest ministry in terms of the share of budget. Were it not for our debt and our interest payment, that is the responsibility of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, the Ministry of Education takes a large chunk of the budget deficit, of the budget. And even during this pandemic, there was no pullback on the part of government. We still invested in education. This breaks it down on a per student basis as a share per capita, and it looks at it pre-primary, primary, secondary, and tertiary institution. Jamaica, the Caribbean, Estonia, Finland, and other countries. Sorry, next. When we look at the expenditure on staff compensation, it is relatively high versus the capital spending. And when you look at the budget as a percentage of the budget, so you can see Jamaica over here at 76% versus other countries in terms of what percent of the budget is staff compensation. Where we're falling down is in capital spending. And you will see this when you go to our schools and you look at the school infrastructure. We have not consistently invested there. If you look at the distribution of staff compensation by function, what you will see is most of that goes towards instructions, which is where it should be, meaning the teachers. Next. Another set of statistics looks at the student-teacher ratio, and I know a lot of times we think that our schools, our classes are packed and that there's 40, 50, 60 students per teacher. There might be an isolated situation, but across the system, when you look at it at pre-primary, on average, I'm not saying that every single school is going to have 11 students per teacher, but on average. If you look at the primary education, about 20 students per teacher on average. And if you look in the secondary schools, 16. And we compare favorably across the world. Okay. Well, the data that's there also looks at teacher qualification and we, across our primary, pre-primary, primary, and secondary, and teacher qualification seems to be fine. Go back to the other one, please. And it's not just government that spends on education, households spend as well. Education is important to parents in Jamaica, and they will make the sacrifice. The research says households spend about 2.6% of GDP on education. And if you look at the components of that, it will be on uniform, on transportation, on lunch, and so forth. That's high. In our education system, for the first time, we have a national standards curriculum, which is uniformed across the entire education sector. So what that means is, if you are, the best school in Kingston, you have the same curriculum as a school in remote Jamaica. So the student there should be getting exposure to the same thing. That's the only way that we begin to close the equity divide, or begin to greater equity in the system. And this curriculum there's a lot of money that the ministry spent to get it designed and implemented, and to train our teachers. There's still training that's needed, but it was implemented in 2018. It is STEM-based, and it's across our system. But we know that the implementation of it is not fully being utilized just yet. So under this new curriculum, the emphasis is on project-based and problem-solving learning, science, technology, engineering, the arts, and mathematics, STEM and STEAM, integrated at all levels. Is it fully integrated in all schools? No. Are all teachers teaching according to this? No, they're not. But that it just requires way more training to get our teachers to that level. Next. In terms of devices and connectivity, because over the last 16 months or so, our children have been primarily in the virtual space. This gives you an idea of the investment that has been made in terms of devices and connectivity. So we would have already distributed 40,000 tablets for PATH students in grades 4, 5, and 6 in our primary schools. We are in the process of distributing another 15,000 tablets for many of our PATH students in grades 10 to 13 in our, 15,000 laptops for many of our PATH students in grades 10 to 13. And then there's another procurement of tablets, some 16,000 tablets for students on PATH in grades 7 to 9 in our high school. We focused on PATH students because they're the most vulnerable in our society. But we also have other initiatives because there are other parents who are needy as well, and they're not on PATH. So an initiative is the Own Your Own Device, the OYOD. The government has made available to 36,000 families, Jamaican, $20,000 towards the purchase of a tablet or laptop. And this program has been launched for a few months now. And to date, 20,000 families have redeemed their vouchers, and they're very happy. We do have a select list of vendors that e-learning would have vetted. And we're working on the other 16,000 to get them to go to redeem their vouchers as well, so that their child can have a device. We also have the one laptop or tablet per child. And I know the PSOJ, when I spoke with President Duncan about this, he did not hesitate to put the strength of the PSOJ behind this. And I want to just pause for a minute to just remember Greta Bogues, who was really a champion for this initiative. And it's called the One Laptop or Tablet per Child Initiative. And it's a broad appeal to corporate Jamaica, to individuals in Jamaica, to our diaspora. And we've seen our diaspora come on board through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and our consulates across the United States, across the world. And to date, you can see 16,830 tablets and 987 laptops have been received and distributed through this program, just the generosity of companies and individuals. And my commitment is I will not stop until all our children have a device in their hand, because I do know that even if we get back fully into the face-to-face mode, technology will remain a permanent and important part of the education system. And already, I mean, we have anecdotal evidence that it is working. I've heard only 2 days ago, a principal is saying, my teachers, they are so much better in terms of their pedagogy and their skill set. We hear from parents as well about their children, so we know it's working. And it's being integrated into the lesson. There has been faster adoption than we could have done ourselves, that the pandemic did for us. And I know today, 15 or so months later, our children in Jamaica who've had access to a device and connectivity have greater technical skills than they did at the start of the pandemic. Next one. Okay, so what do we need more of in the education sector to really get us going? We need more accountability. We need heavy-duty character education in schools. We need system-wide teacher effectiveness in the classrooms. And what I'm saying to you this afternoon isn't anything that I haven't said before in a public forum. This came out of my sectorial in Parliament, and I've been talking to our regions and to the education system since then. We need continuous teacher in-service professional and personal development. We need more of that. We need more good old-fashioned time or hours teachers spend teaching. We need good old-fashioned time or hours that students spend learning. We need accountability for student absenteeism and dropout. And we need an objective teacher appraisal system. And I'll touch on all of these because in the system, we have begun the implementation of many of these initiatives. So a World Bank study would have alerted us, certainly it jarred me when I read it. It looked at how many years our children spend in school. And it says a child in Jamaica can expect to complete 11.4 years of pre-primary, primary, and secondary school by age 18. However, when years of schooling are adjusted for quality of learning, this is only equivalent to 7.1 years. So there's a learning gap of 4.3 years. And this had nothing to do with the pandemic. So imagine the impact of the pandemic on that figure. So that was the World Bank. This is actually, when I talk to principals on the ground, they agree with that assessment because this is from a principal in a very large high school. He said, on average, Jamaican teachers spend 16 minutes of the 40 minutes class session attempting to establish order, maintain silence, enforce discipline, or attending to administrative concerns. So that's 40% of the class time gone doing kind of non-academic teaching and learning. So I identified earlier on that what we need more of is teacher effectiveness. We do have in the education system an entity called the National Education Inspectorate, and they have been inspecting the teaching that goes on in the classroom from 2000 and a long time now, 2008, 2011. And so they have a lot of data on school leadership, teacher effectiveness, teaching and learning, and they rank all the schools. And one of the areas, when you look at schools and why their students are not achieving more, it's teacher effectiveness. And so that's an area that we want to prioritize in the school year going forward. And how are we going to do this? Some of the things that we have been working on would include creating an online repository of lesson plans for our teachers. You might know right now our teachers have to write lesson plans. Takes a lot of time. It might not the same, a lesson plan in school A might not be the same as a lesson plan in school B. And so with the ministry coming in, taking this on, creating this online repository, we will have greater uniformity across our system and greater confidence that what a student in remote rural school is learning is consistent with the national standards curriculum. And I want to say that the JTA has commended the ministry for launching this initiative. In their own words, they think it will be a game changer. We also, in terms of increasing teacher effectiveness, want to acknowledge that the learning style of boys ought to be given some attention. You saw the numbers that were put up, just the gap between boys and girls. And I know that gender-based learning is not hot in international circles. It's not something they endorse. But in Jamaica, I think our data is saying our boys need to be pulled out from time to time and be given some special attention, and also that we need more men in the classrooms and that we ought to put programs in place to attract more male teachers. One of the ways that we are going to increase teacher effectiveness beginning this September is to transition, if you will, not 100%, but to introduce a specialist model in our primary schools. Don't know if you're aware right now that in our primary schools, one teacher teaches all subjects. So PE, Spanish, biology, language arts, mathematics, science, one teacher, right? We believe where we are now in 2021 that we ought to introduce a specialist model in our primary schools, even if it is just for English, language arts and mathematics, to give our children that, a boost in that area. And I know that teachers who are specialists in their area, they have zeal, they have zest, they want to teach, and, they will use different ways to get children to learn. The specialist model has been in a pilot mode. There's a lot of work done in terms of rolling it out bigger. It's going to be on a phased basis starting in September 2021 in the new school year. I believe with, PS, you remember the number of schools? About 100? Yes, about 180 schools that will roll this out in. And then in January of 150 for January, and then we'll go again September, and we'll keep rolling it out. Because, again, having a child exposed to someone who is a specialist at that early age will give them, I think, a better chance of learning the subject. We will also robustly implement the master teacher concept across the education sector. It exists right now, but it is small. We see the master teacher concept as a career path for many teachers who are good at what they do, and we are going to scale that up so we have more master teachers available across our system. We're going to raise the level of in-service professional growth and personal development beginning September 2021, and this happens right now in the system, but we're putting greater focus on it so that our teachers who are in the the profession right now, they will be able to grow more personally and professionally. And then teacher appraisal, there's an instrument currently in the field already. I know the Jamaica teaching, okay, it's settled finally, right? It's settled with the JTA in terms of the appraisal instrument, and it's going to be rolled out wider across the system. And this is an accomplishment, a big achievement. Additionally, the JTC, which is Jamaica Teaching Council, that Keith, you mentioned these studies that happened long ago. The Jamaica Teaching Council was a recommendation from one of the studies in 2004. The entity was started, it had no legislation, no teeth. And finally, we're at the point where I think our next step is to take the cabinet, take the draft to cabinet and then move it to legislation committee and on to parliament. So these are the ideas. But if you don't implement, you can't see the impact of these ideas. So that's what we're doing. Accountability, I know I talked about this in my sectoral, and it wasn't carried very well in the press. It was carried as if I am blaming teachers, even though I went to great pains to say what accountability is. And I know I have it on there, Christina, it's in the notes, what accountability is, but I will read it out loud from my sectoral, what I meant by accountability. Oh my God. Unless you can bring it up. It's in the notes. But anyhow, accountability is not blaming. It's not looking back. It is just saying that we all have a responsibility for the education sector. We all have a responsibility for the outcome of the education sector and to make it better as we go along. So it's not assigning blame at all to anyone, but just raising the awareness about the fact that all of us who are in the sector, the Ministry of Education, the teachers, the principals, parents, everyone. So accountability is not the same as blame or punishment. Blame is focused on the past and on punishing the offender. To be accountable means to take responsibility for results, good or bad. It means finding solutions to problems and applying lessons learned in order to improve future results. Being accountable is constructive because it focuses on the future, and that is what I would like for everyone across the education sector, and including our parents, to really accept, because I know that this will move us farther, faster. Next slide, please. Character education is something that I also talked about in my sectoral as something that we will implement in our schools. We have a plan to do so come January 2022. We have a task force that's made up of a wide cross-section of private sector professionals, psychologists, psychiatrists, and we've been meeting and talking about this character education. So character education, I believe, will teach our students a sense of diligence, how to focus on their studies and have the drive to do well, how to interact with teachers and other students in and out of the classroom. And because our students spend quite a bit of time in school, school is the perfect place to teach character education. Research shows that schools that prioritize character education as part of their curriculum have fewer incidences of disciplinary referrals, suspensions, and truancy, and that character education is expected to bring improvement to schools. I know that It is not just the program that we put in school, it's the understanding that we have of our children, and that's what this task force on character education is bringing home to me, to help me to understand that the environment from which our children come will impact their readiness for school, and how the teachers receive those children in the classroom is going to have even greater impact. So, for instance, if a child shows up and the child is rowdy, rude, and whatever the behavior is, typically you might send that child to the back of the class or do something. But what if we were able to institute the kind of training that would say to the teacher to ask the question, what happened to this child this morning? Why is this child acting up? And to be able to reach into the home to understand what is happening in the life of that child. So this is going to guide us to put more psychosocial help into our schools, more counselors, because, when you look at the statistics, they are frightening in terms of the abuse that our children suffer in their homes, in terms of the physical punishment that they get, the pinching, the punching, the shouting at, the beating with an implement, all of those things, it impacts how they show up at school. And if we are not prepared, if we don't prepare our teachers or guidance counselors for that, we're going to have children who just come out at the other end, even more rowdy, right? And we have them perfect, they're perfectly formed, and they go right into the gangs. That's what we will be producing. So you will hear more about this character education because it comes at it from a different perspective than we're used to. It's not just about a program or an initiative in school. It's about the understanding of why our children are showing up the way they are in schools. Okay. I'm going to pivot just a little bit to talk about capital spending. Capital spending in our schools has been very low. Successive governments have not spent enough. Yes, we've built a lot of primary schools, we've built a lot of high schools, but we have not systematically gone back and made sure that the infrastructure of schools keep up with what it should be. So in every meeting that I attend with principals and teachers, the complaint, the pain point has been leaky roof, floors that are rotten, sanitation that's not adequate, electrical works that are going to catch fire any moment. It is something that is very challenging for our teachers or for our principals in school. And given that we're on the path with the STEM-based curriculum, see, STEM-based is not just about the subject. STEM-based is also about your environment. And so we have to begin to match our environment with our curriculum. I know that you talk about budget implications and so on, but we have to take it on. We have to find creative ways to take it on so our schools can begin to look better, inspiring. I'm sure you go to some of these schools and you go, oh my God, this is where our students are coming and our teachers are coming to work. No, we have to do better. Seriously. So this is a passion of mine, and I've charged the ministry. We have the data at the ministry. The World Bank and UTEC spent 2 years going across Jamaica, looking at all our school buildings, gathering the data. They've ranked them in terms of good, fair, poor, so we know which ones. It's up to us now to kind of package it, take it through the process. Maybe we ask the private sector for ideas about how we accelerate this. So that's about our infrastructure. Okay. So I know I spent a lot of time talking about our primary schools and our high schools, but our early childhood sector is there. It's aligned with our primary school because those children come out of the early childhood sector and into our primary schools. when I look at the data, the assessment, many of our students there have learning disabilities. So we want to continue the use of assessment because it's done at age 4. And what that does, it gives us the data and we can make the intervention. I think we've had 1 year of this assessment so far, 2 years of this assessment. It's something that should be institutionalized, but it needs to be automated. It's very manual right now, so it takes a long time to gather the information and then to collate it. So we want to do that. We want to roll out more of these brain builder programs across, and it's where the children get, they have trained practitioners in the school rather than sending your child to Auntie Mattie down the corner who is doing a basic school out of her living room or something. We want our early childhood sector to be more organized, for the government to have a larger role, for there to be more trained practitioners in our early childhood sector. Okay. All right. So, yeah. So we want to accelerate the number of government-sponsored early childhood institutions, expand our teachers' understanding of play at that early age so that we get more of our children who are adjusted so that when they get to primary school, they're in a better frame of mind. Okay, all right, next. Okay, so we want to create more time for education overall in the system. And so you would have seen us announce recently our national NSLIP, National School Learning Intervention Plan. And that's a very near-term plan, as opposed to some of these other initiatives that are going to start in January or further into 2022. So there are 4 components of this plan. So you have this school-based component where our teachers and our principals at the school level, they have information, they can intervene, they can pull students out of class, teach them separately, move them along, and so on. But you also have our national summer school program that was rolled out. First time ever in the history of Jamaica. We have a national summer school program. It was well received by parents, students across the board. It was face-to-face and online. And we've had good feedback from it. And it is something that we will continue. It should be institutionalized, not just because it's COVID and we're trying to catch up with the learning loss, but it goes back to what I said, our students need more time on task. It is not enough for parents to send their children to school at 7:30 to 2:30 with all the things they do in between, the PE, the this, the that, and then expect the student to be high achieving. It's not happening. And we know that because when we look at parents in upper class who can afford to get a tutor for their child and extra lessons, they're putting out the money to get the tutor and the extra lessons. But there are a lot of parents who cannot afford it. And so the government has stepped forward to ensure through our national homework program and our national extra lesson program, which will roll out in the next school year, that parents, it will be available to all our parents, especially our vulnerable families, this extra lesson. And we believe the students having more time on task will help because there are things that need to be concepts that need to be repeated. They need to be able to go over things, ask questions, and so on in order to absorb what they learn in the classroom that day. All right. So that's how we're going to create more time for education overall in the system. We talked about increasing teacher effectiveness already. We talked about teaching boys separately from girls in selected subjects, and creating an early warning system to help us to reduce the absenteeism at school. And in any year, about 25% of our students are absent. So we, in our school management system, we are going to have an automated way to collect attendance at school that will allow us to get the information quicker so that we will know that, John was absent for 2 days in a row. We put the infrastructure in at the ministry that says first, you call the home to find out what's happening to John. Why was John absent? Day one, you call the home to see if the parents knows that the child was absent, right? Day two, you raise the bar. You might find out that the child was hit, abused, something, we have to. If we just ignore the fact that the child is absent and never do anything, never inquire about it, then we lose a good 25% of our children, just like that. Our teachers in the classroom are important because they can see that a child who used to be bubbly is coming to school and, just silent, not saying anything. They can do some interaction and, put that information on our system so that we can help more of our children and kind of know what's happening to them as well. Another thing that we want to do to help our students in school is to restore to prominence the uniform groups. Yes, they exist right now. They've been in our schools for a long time, but we want to have more schools having access to the uniform groups. And you know who they are. It's, the Boy Scout, the Girls Guide, all of that, because they teach discipline, they teach you to show up on time, they do all of these things. So we want to restore that. We're working with the Ministry of National Security. They are thrilled that we want to put a focus on this as well. And a longer-term initiative is that when we build new schools, we should consider boarding options as well to take some of our children out of the toxic environment in which they live. All right, I think we're winding down now. One of the things that we are looking at and want to launch for this upcoming school year is to make our grade 12 and 13, which is our sixth form, a must-do choice for our students. Right now, sixth form has been the traditional sixth form. So we're going to add 2 more programs to it so that if you can't go the traditional sixth form because it didn't pass the CSEC to go into sixth form, then there are 2 other paths for you. And we want to do it at the schools. We want to have all our high schools with a sixth form program. We know initially that might not be the case, but our plan is to have the sixth form program at all our high schools to give our students 2 additional years. Because when they graduate at grade 11 and they're 16 years old, you're not going to hire them, Mr. Duncan. They don't have what you need in the workplace just yet. But 2 additional years, more skills. When they come out, they're more mature to go into the workforce if that's where they choose to go. By then, they could have repeated their CSEC as well, because there's a chance to repeat that. And who knows, they might get enough to go into the Kpis program. So there are more opportunities created. And it's right now, our students, when they graduate from high school, if they don't go to sixth form, they kind of have to find their way around the system to get some extra training or whatever, And for a lot of students, it doesn't happen. So we want to have a more uniform approach, just put it all together, package it better, so that our students can have access to it. We want to institutionalize a national school leaving certificate. You talked about 66% of our workforce not certified. We want our children leaving to have a history of what it is that they've done in school, include all their community-based activity on that school leaving certificate, and so on, so they feel more confident when they have to present themselves to employers. There's a plan to implement the National Qualifications Framework, which is also part of this. And we want our schools, we want school on sixth form to be exciting and interesting for our students. And so we think that our sixth formers, before they leave school, they should learn to drive. We should give them driver education as a way to, one, to shift the mentality on the roads. In a generation, even less than a generation, a few years, if we turn out students who we can teach about road code and the habits and good driving habits, you will see that transformation on our streets. That's how you do it, I believe. And make sure they have the must-have documents, birth certificate, passports. And I know this because I'm a member of parliament, and I know when I walk into communities how difficult it is when I have programs that I want students to sign up for. They don't have documents that, are just run-of-the-mill documents for us to have. So the schools have to get more actively involved in helping our students to achieve that. And I think I may have one or two slides left. Christine? Okay. So no, it's the last one. So here is my abiding belief in our education system, that our public schools can be ranked among the best in the world. But we have to do the work. We have to do it relentlessly, day in and day out. There are no shortcuts. There are many Jamaicans who are ranked highly in the world, in their field, at universities, wherever, but we need more of those. And we need to begin in terms of the way that I believe that I've laid it out, looking at our early childhood sector, how children show up in our pre-primary, what information do we have about them, what is the interaction in the classrooms, how they move from grade to grade, how do they transition to high school, introducing specialist teachers, introducing all the initiatives I've talked about. I believe firmly that at least in my time at the wicket there, at the Ministry of Education, I believe that we will see a significant difference in it, and I know that we are waking up every day to do the work to move the education system along. I've been encouraging the ministry. They have lots of ideas. They have lots of good people at the ministry, sharp people who are very good. But I say to them, all these ideas you have, they need to be scaled up in order to see any impact in the school system. Yes, you do a pilot, and you have the program running at 50 schools. Whoop-de-doo. It's not going to make a difference in terms of the overall numbers. We need to go big or go home. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Okay.
Thank you, Minister, for that very comprehensive, encouraging, inspirational presentation. Really enjoyed it. And I'm sure many online as well enjoyed it. So everyone, this is the time now when we have the opportunity to ask the Minister any questions we may have. I am on Zoom with you. One of my phones. And so what we're going to do is just go back to basics. If you have any questions, just raise your hand on Zoom. So, does anyone have any questions for the Minister? The floor is now open. Oh, you have it on the screen there. Great. I have questions too, but I thought I'll give everyone a chance. So anyone in the room? Yes. Yes, Miss Maya Johnson. Go ahead. How does it work? Okay, great.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for that presentation, Minister. And as Mariam said, lots of inspirational ideas, and very excited to hear of your concept about go big or go home. In terms of...
That's good.
Go forward?
Yeah, we can see you well.
Okay, so one of the things as part of the PSOJ Human Capital Development Committee that we've been discussing is how can the private sector help? How can we partner with the ministry in terms of contributing to moving the ball forward? We certainly have been discussing lots of ideas, but I think it would really help us to get some direction from the ministry as to where you see the biggest opportunities for partnership. You mentioned a few things here that I thought certainly caught my attention in terms of, for example, the need for capital spend in the schools.
Yeah.
And we've looked at international benchmarks around, for example, private sector organizations adopting a school one by one. And so, you know, that might be an idea, for example, that we could work together on. But I'm sure there are many more, and we would love your thoughts as to where you would most like to see the private sector get involved.
Beyond what we're already doing. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have one here.
Yeah. Yes. Was the minister? Should the minister stand or should she sit? Should she stand?
Okay.
Yes. Okay, minister. Yes.
All right. So thank you for those questions. And oh, by the way, there are 1,000 schools, so we could begin to match up each school. So let me tell you a couple of ways in which the private sector is helping right now. So we have Keith, who's been helping us to lead our broadband in school initiative, and it's been immensely useful for us because he brings that private sector perspective to us and to help to kind of give us the confidence to move forward, to negotiate, to do all the things that we need to do to have broadband in our schools. And our plan is for every school across Jamaica to have a minimum bandwidth. That's already been agreed, described, negotiations are going on, we're putting a framework together, and so on. So it's lending your technical expertise to different areas such as that. We talk about the building, certainly the infrastructure, that is key as well. Because, you know, a lot of times I say when I go out to talk at schools, I say to the teachers and to the students, you know, if this was our workplace, we would not want to be in this workplace. We would, you know, revolt. We would we wouldn't. So why are we subjecting our teachers and our students to that? Obviously, I know it's an issue of budget and it's going to take some time to get done, but I know that there are creative ideas as well in terms of how we can accelerate that. An important consideration for students as they think about sixth form is the employment possibilities, right? After that. How can we get our private sector to recognize that summer employment is important for our students, internships, important, and all those things, because students do get trained, you know, but then when they get trained, they kind of don't know where to go with it. They think you have to know somebody in order to get a job, and there's no organized way in our country right now, right, that can make that connection between education and employment. And I think we can put our heads together and create a framework where a student knows, you know, yes, it might not be right away after school, but you know, it's going to happen. And they can be guided as well into careers by more companies opening their doors to just having students come in for a day trip at their organization to see what they're doing, to allow for them to ask questions, especially the manufacturing companies, that you know, see how beer is made and how, you know, this is made, cement and all of those things, to expose our children. There's a lot of ideas for collaboration with the private sector that doesn't necessarily take money. It's not, you know, it can be done.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Maya.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Can we give Keith
the
a mic?
PSOJ launched the youth program a number of years ago. Remember when we had
Yes.
you remember them?
With
you remember
youth.
And it worked well in terms of integrating young people from the inner city communities and from other communities into the workforce. It worked well, and youth is now a Youth Multicare Foundation. But there are examples of programs that work with some level of commitment because there was coordination. Minister, and if there is that kind of coordination that occurs, and it can occur because if we just put it in the minister's scorecard, because the minister and PS need them scorecard now with all of those initiatives.
Right,
so
exactly.
Where things are going. You know what I mean? And we have that as a deliverable, as a public sector, private sector partnership, and as a deliverable, because Mega and I were discussing that today with the Jamaica Constabulary Force, in terms of how do you can train the people, but if you can seamlessly move them into the workforce, then
they just get despondent. Exactly.
So I think that we can use that youth model and even explore it. So therefore, that is something that we should put on our agenda in terms of. Am I right?
Yes.
And how do you
sounds
scale it
good.
up?
No, man, it sounds good.
Right,
Definitely.
Right. But there is also the funding, because I noticed we focus on right now the police stations, because the whole national security, our whole police force and the police stations were in total disrepair.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think even worse than the schools were.
Yeah.
And there had to be a focus on on getting the police stations up to a place where even the citizens felt good about going into the police station and the police feel good about going to work. We need to do the same thing with the schools now. So therefore, as we wrap up the police stations, maybe we need to move to the schools.
Yeah.
But also, is there like a sale and lease back? Because if the schools are owned by the government of Jamaica, you can do a sale and lease back.
So that's what I'm saying. The idea is let's put our creativity
bring in some money. So that is a good thing. And we have the financial engineers like Mariam right over there.
Right.
So that's a sale and lease back program that could be done. And you select some schools and you get some money up front.
Yeah.
And be able to focus and pumping some money into the schools. So that's
all right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Idea worth exploring.
Discussion. Yeah. So any other questions? Can we go to the next question? Yes, there is a question in the chat. Right. Excuse my phone model. Okay. So in the chat, we're not hearing. It's very low. Okay, we will bear that in mind.
There's a hand raised.
There's a what, sorry? Oh, Jackie Coke-Lloyd. How come it's not showing up here? Okay, go ahead, Jackie. Thank you for your question in advance. Thank you. Over to you, Jackie. Okay, Jackie, would you mind typing your question in the chat? As we're not hearing. Okay. I can talk? I should ask my question. Yes, so I will now ask my question. Are there any other questions in the room first? Minister, I have so many questions. I could talk about education all day long. Okay, so one of the questions that has come up, which, well, I have two questions. Number one is, of all the initiatives that the ministry is pursuing, and all of them are very high-impact initiatives, if you had to say the top 3 initiatives that will be done in the near term with the biggest bang for its buck, so to speak, I'd love to hear kind of what are those top 3. So that's question number 1. And then question number 2 is, as we head back to school in 6 weeks, some of us with young kids are like, nervous, right? I'm just kidding. Nervous because it's just going to be a logistical, interesting exercise. We wanted to just get your thoughts on the status. with the teachers, with the ministry, and how we're thinking about, or how you're thinking about the decision-making around that as you guide the country on this. So those are my two questions. So maybe the first one you could take.
So the first one has to do with the top three priorities. The top three priorities.
Yes, timing.
And I would say my first priority would be to implement in a broad-based way the specialist teachers in our primary schools. Okay. That is going to make a significant difference. And as well, our lesson plan repository, and while that may sound academic to the private sector, in education it is a huge deal, because teachers have to sit down on a Sunday night and write lesson plans, and they may or may not do it, and you know, you have all kind of issues in the school, and it's across for every subject, for every grade, across the system, so that a school in remote rural Jamaica, the teacher has access to the same lesson plans that highfalutin school, high-achieving school in Kingston has. And we have confidence that they're teaching to the curriculum.
Minister, could you almost shout so that the persons on Zoom can hear?
Okay, all right, sorry.
Thank you.
The mic. Okay. All right, I don't know. And then, all right, and then the third priority would be our 7-year high school. That is significant for me because of right now what exists. Like I said to you, the thinking in most people's mind is that sixth form is for Cape students. We want to get it into our students that sixth form is a must for you, and we have the kinds of programs that will attract and keep them. In the initial first year, it will be voluntary, but thereafter, we have the law that says it should be mandatory. But because of... Right, so it'd be two different programs, right, kind of like two different programs, depending. Obviously, if you have your 5 CSEC, and you know you're going to Cape and you're going to go on to tertiary, but if you have 1 CSEC, we don't want you to feel like, oh, I didn't achieve. We just want to give you that chance, because during the next 2 years, during the 2 years you're there, you can repeat the CSEC that you never passed. And, you know, there's a difference between a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old and an 18 in terms of the maturity. So those would be my top three priorities.
Thank you very much, Minister.
And
then the second question, and so I know
back to school.
Yeah, the back to school plan. Jacqueline Cook-Lloyd was trying to come in, and we weren't allowing her to unmute, so I just put us on notice. After the minister finishes answering that question, we could ask her to come in. So, Minister, this back to school plan that's happening in 6 to 7 weeks, how are we thinking about it? Yeah.
All right. So, you know that the back to school is going to be dependent on where we are in the pandemic.
Yes.
I just have to put that out front because we're guided by the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We just have to. But what we're doing at the ministry is planning for different scenarios.
Yes.
So you would have in education, we have our building officers activated, and so they're going out, they're dealing with the termite problems, they're dealing with this in schools, the leaky roof, the this, the that. So if September morning, it's face-to-face, we'll be ready in terms of the physical infrastructure. And Keith knows that of the plans for connectivity in our schools as well. So that's one eventuality, that's one scenario if we're back in the face-to-face environment, all right? Another scenario could be the online, the virtual world, right? It could be. And so we have to be prepared for that as well. And so, right, so the plan is to have all our schools with connectivity, so our teachers can go to school if needs be to use the internet there, rather than what we've seen the past year where they had to stay at home and they might not have good connectivity and so on. Or it could be something in the middle, where you have the mixed modality. So students are able to come to school Monday, Wednesday, and you rotate, right? So those are the plans that we have on the books right now. We are encouraging our teachers to take up the vaccine. To date, about 8,000 of our teachers at least one dose. I think when you look at the about 25,000.
Of how many?
25,000.
Oh, okay, great.
So about a third. And about 4,000 would have had the second dose, I think, second dose. So the take-up, if you look at the 8,000, 33% of total is pretty high, right? The take-up, yeah. They're a priority group and will continue to be a priority group as well. And right, but you know what? We've had town hall meetings where we brought health professionals to speak to, and the ones we've had, there have been 1,000 people on it. If you ever lose your connectivity, you can't get back on because, you know, there are that many people. And just allow the teachers to ask whatever questions they want to. And we found that has helped, and we're going to have more of that, to give teachers the information, allow them to ask questions, and to, you know, get over whatever hesitancy they may have for schools, because we would love for them to be back in school.
The private sector initiative, and we've been working with Peter Figueroa and
PSVI.
Dr. Ramon R. Scott, some people who can really break it down.
We could invite them as well. Yeah. We've had Dr. Ennis, who really can talk
Peter Figueroa
the lingo and just, you know, break it down as well. But we will be happy to have them on our town hall as well.
Thank you very much, Minister. Okay, so we have a question from Jacqueline Coke Lloyd, and then Audrey Tugwell Henry, and then Orville Johnson. So I'm going to over to you, Jacqueline Coke Lloyd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, PSOJ, for hosting this. And Minister, thank you for that very good presentation. I have two questions. One, you spoke to the issue of our boys, and I think most of the studies are showing that our boys are not doing very well. Most do not matriculate to university, and therefore they will not matriculate into most of our business places, because I think we only have, 15% of our university population being male. And that is coming from our high schools. And of course, it goes back to the primary school as well, and the basic schools. And my understanding is that our basic schools don't have enough qualified teachers. If that's the case, how are we addressing that so that when they get to high school, they would have been suitably prepared and they're able to matriculate onto university and so on? Because it starts in the early. Are our teachers prepared to teach at the basic school level? And two, how are we dealing with the fact that our boys are not doing as well? I know your presentation spoke about probably a little more attention and men going back into the classroom, but how deliberate are we going to be about this matter? Because we can't have a society where men are failing, because we're doomed to create another imbalance, and our economy will not grow even if we put in infrastructure.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you
for those questions. With regards to our early childhood sector, I'm going to ask you to make a distinction between basic schools and infant schools. The infant schools are the government's effort to transition basic schools, which are privately owned, out of somebody's house, wherever, to transition those to infant schools that are linked to a primary school, or could be an infant school, standalone infant school. And in that, you have trained professionals paid for by the government, as opposed to a basic school where parents pay if they can, and you get somebody, somebody's auntie, somebody's sister to kind of oversee. So that's what we want to move away from. And this year we've targeted 102, 107 of those. I mean, we've done the assessment already. They are ready to be transitioned to infant school. We'd love to accelerate that because there are over 3,000 basic schools across Jamaica.
And they're like private.
Yeah, they're private, right. So we'd love to, because then we'll be able to have trained professionals, practitioners in it, and you have the link into the primary school for them to go on. You have the assessment that's done, and we're able to see what kind of learning disabilities they have and so on, how to move them along. So there's it's a big number at that level that we have to work on to transition over the years. And then in terms of our boys, yeah.
What, 3,000 basic schools, you're starting with 100 this year?
Overall. No.
So
Right.
maybe you're trying to...
So we have already, in terms of infant schools, how many, like, yeah, 350? Right. Right, that we have already. So
Okay.
the transition started, but it needs to be accelerated.
Okay,
Is
okay.
what we'd like to do. In terms of our boys, we have to get to that place in Jamaica where we stop abusing our boys in the homes. We stop meting out physical punishment to them because it is negatively impacting them when they show up in the education system. If you look at the statistics, and the statin has lots of statistics that show that boys are more abused than girls. It impacts them psychologically, right? And they're not able to learn in the way they should. And we need to really take that seriously, or else, you know, all these programs that we put in, yes, it will catch a few of them, but on a whole scale basis, it won't be able to. We need to stop. We need to stop beating our children. We need to stop pinching, punching, beating them with implements because it is impacting their readiness for education. And I'm not just talking about, you know, the small child, all along the way as well. And, you know, the data is there that says our boys are more abused than our girls, and we have to stop that. But in addition to that, let's assume that they show up, how they show up. We have to have the expertise in our schools to deal with this, you know, the psychosocial of our children. We can't say, oh, it's just bad behavior and in bad and in head tough and in this. We can't treat it in the way that we've traditionally treated it. We have to get to that place where we say, like I said earlier on, what is happening in the life of this child? Why is this child acting this way? And I know it's going to take us time and energy and resources. Otherwise, if we just use a broad brush approach and ignore some and carry on, we'll continue to get what we have. So we have to stop, and we have to deal with our children who show up that way on a one-on-one basis and give them the heavy intervention that they need and the care and support. In a lot of our homes, love is missing, nurturing is missing, and we can always talk about highfalutin things in the education sector, but we just have to admit that this is happening and take the steps to, you know, to our parents or caregivers all across Jamaica. Physical violence is hurting our children in more ways than one. It's not just the weld that you see on their hand, it's what it's doing to their psyche, and that is very important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Minister. Okay, we have two questions from Audrey Tugwell Henry. Audrey, I don't know if you want to ask the question or you want me to read it out. Audrey going once, twice? All right, fine. I'll read it, Audrey. Okay, so 2 questions for the minister. This is Audrey. First of all, thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. Question number 1, what percentage of the education budget is spent on early childhood? And then she says, strategically, are there plans to adjust the current level of spend to support a transformation of the students' performance? So that first on early childhood, and strategically, are there plans to adjust the current level of spend to support a transformation of the students' performance? And then she says, question 2, so that's all around early childhood. And then, okay, yeah, man, no problem.
In terms of the spend at the early childhood level, in dollar amount, is probably about $3.5 billion, which is based on our budget of $110 billion. It's kind of 3%. Okay. Yeah.
Is there any plans to increase that spend to support improved student performance?
I know that right now we have one of our international partners looking at the spend in the education sector to see what kind of efficiencies, that's the World Bank study, what kind of efficiencies we can get. We anxiously await that study to help us because we need to understand it. It's not like we can wake up tomorrow and, move things around and so on. So there's that study that is happening in the education sector.
Okay, and the timing on that, Minister, in terms of when it would be completed, the study?
Yeah.
Okay, by year end.
Before
year
that.
end. Okay,
Yeah.
and then Audrey Tugwell-Henry says she's muted. I don't know if you want to unmute her. Question 2. Question 2, Minister. What are the plans to improve technical training and reform the technical schools?
Okay. P.S., I'm going to ask you to take that one because I know that we are looking at the TVET in our schools and so on, the integration of TVET. So
I'll take it just before I do the vote of that.
all right,
Okay,
yeah.
all right, no problem.
We have a question for the PS2.
Okay.
We know that the minister is policy.
Can you give Mr. Duncan a
Finish the
mic, please?
Yeah. We know that the minister is policy, right? The minister is policy, and the PM Permanent Secretary and the ministry is execution, implementation of the policy, right? Now, over the years, after you get all of these studies, Grace, and you have one minister come and say they want to do this, and another minister come and say they want to do that, and you say, Lord God, another minister, no. How are you going to manage with the implementation now, Grace, to all of these initiatives and imperatives which sound really, really good? Okay. What are you, how do you have the capacity to execute Dr. Grace McLean and the Ministry of Education?
All right.
So, Chairman, we are called civil servants.
Yes, ma'am.
And as civil servants, we are civil and we serve.
Yeah.
And so our focus is not on the person who comes to give us the policy direction. Our focus is on having the deliberations, ensuring that we put the facts on the table in terms of what happened before, so the minister is aware and to be guided by the policy direction. So over the years, from my experience for the last 10 years, I have seen the transition from the task force report of 2004. I have seen successive ministers under different administration advancing the objectives and the directions from the task force report. And so we are happy to comply. If there's a change in policy direction, we accept the change gracefully because it is in the best interest of the Jamaican children, and we move ahead with our minister. As Minister has said, we have highly competent and very technical persons within the ministry. We have had, if I should say, a rush of the adrenaline. So because Minister has facilitated that broad-based discussion from the executive level down to the management level. And so because of the virtual platforms, we can engage about 80 persons from different levels in a meeting with our minister. And she listens diligently to all of us, and she packages whatever is said. And we saw the transformation in the sectorial presentation, which was done earlier this year. So we are very excited. Our minister has come and would have listened to some of the innovative activities, for example, the specialist model, which we started from about 2014 or so when we sent a team to Singapore to look at the performance of their primary schools. They have the best system in the world, and next to Finland. And Minister saw this as a low-hanging fruit, and she facilitated us getting to this stage where we are going to be commencing the full implementation. So we are very happy with the direction. We are happy with the level of details that our minister places on what exists and the understanding before a direction is given. So we are equal to the task, and we are committed to the Jamaican people with our minister at this time to make it happen.
Wow.
Technical and vocational education has been, let me say, a mainstay over the last 8 or 9 years. We started in about 2012, the integration of technical and vocational education. Fast forward to 2021, we have all 171 high schools who have at least one technical and vocational area being implemented, including the traditional high schools doing electronics and electrical technology, engineering, and so on. We have significantly upgraded the labs. We have spent about 300 million on the upgrade of labs. We have trained the teachers. There is a model for the integration of TVET in the system. It also started with the curriculum. So in the curriculum is predicated on STEM, and inclusive in STEM, we have the TVET areas. So at the grade 4 level, for example, there is project-based learning, which begins, and that is where the students get an opportunity to practice, to apply, to see a problem, to try to solve the problem. A simple electrical circuit, for example, where the light bulb is not coming on because a wire is not connected, and you do whatever to see it connected. And then you work back to say, this was a problem I solved. What were the inputs to solve this problem? So it starts with project-based learning, which is being implemented at the grade 4 level under the primary exit profile. And then as they transition, because the curriculum is actually aligned. So what you do at grade 4 is actually built on grade 5, grade 6, and grade 7. So it's on a continuum. They move into resource and technology, which they do all of these broad-based areas. Of course, technology plays a very important part. So they are doing gaming, animation. Minister, through her direction, we introduced coding at grade 4 and grade 9 as a pilot, highly successful pilot to be rolled out in September, and our minister started that. So TVET is actually at a stage now where it's just to take it to the next level, scaling it up, and ensuring that technology is applied using the STEM-based approach. So, Audrey, we have really significantly advanced that area. And just to say, if I may say, that was the area I did my PhD in. So I have been able to successfully implement, under the direction of different ministers, starting with Reverend Tweets, the objectives that were actually designed and we had planned to achieve. So I think that is a low-hanging fruit and a success at this time in the ministry.
Thank you, Dr. McLean. Thank you very much. And thank you, Audrey, for the questions as well. All right, so now we'll just go to Orville Johnson as we get ready to wrap up here. What are the plans for remuneration of teachers to attract good people in the classroom, keep those who have as well, stem the recruiting of our better teachers to go overseas? So how do we keep good people and also keep them home and stem the brain drain, so to speak? From Mr. Orville Johnson. Oh.
the master teachers as a career path for our teachers who are good at what they do, but they don't necessarily want to be tied down in a classroom or as a principal. They don't want to. So we want to scale that up so we have a good career path for those teachers so that they are not wanting to leave the system and go abroad. And a lot of work has been done there. I think we're in the kind of recruiting process right now, looking across the system to see how many. It's been in existence, how many years? And they only have 35. So when I talk about scaling things up, that's what I mean, right? Because 35 is not going to move the needle, right? So that's just one of the initiatives. And like I said, I'm not going to venture into talking about compensation for teachers. That's the purview of the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service.
Well said.
You have one more.
I do have one more, but...
I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
So this one is now, why does society, we hear all the problems, and we hear what's not working. And, what I've heard today was that there was an education transformation plan from 2004. There's continuity in that plan. And how can we keep, because it's about confidence of our people and the private sector and civil society in where we're going as a country, and education is a big part of that. How do we ensure that people understand where we are, that these are the KPIs that we're watching, Minister and PS McLean, and that we are moving in the right direction? How you keep people engaged and them say, yeah, I understand where we're going, we're moving in the right direction, and these are the KPIs. You know what I mean? People, I don't know how much people watch sectoral presentation. I don't think, you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right.
So
what kind of framework, social partnership to support and...
Right, so the sectorial for me was the pulling together of all the various things, all the conversations that I had across the sector from September of last year to April of this year, because I did it at the end of April, to pull it all together, right? And to say this is the direction in which we're going. You have a program over here. It's only in 10 schools. It's working well. Let us scale it up, right? And like I said, that's what I noticed in the education sector. Lots of little things, lots of activities, but the big activities that will make a difference, it's lacking. And that's where I'm pushing, prioritizing the specialist teachers, the master teachers, right? Specializing, we're rolling out the appraisal system that has been, God, we've had thousands of conversations about that for years. We're getting the legislation so that teachers have to be fit and proper, and all the implementation is what has been slow, tardy. There are things that have gotten implemented, but in small ways. So to scale it up. And so in terms of the framework now, what we need to do is itemize, make Jamaicans know, publish, so that they can see the KPIs, right? So it's not just us in the education sector talking about it, but Jamaicans can hold us responsible to these things that we commit to and the impact that we say that they're going to have. Yeah.
Okay.
2023, 2022 is where
With the milestones.
Yes.
And Minister, the scope of this will include the independent prep schools as well, the specialist programs, the master teachers. I thought that was a quick one to.
This is primarily for the public schools, because the independent schools are,
resourced?
they are businesses, enterprises for those individuals
Okay.
who own those independent schools.
Okay.
All we do at the ministry, we do share information. So, for example, our learning management system, we made that
Yes.
available to our independent schools. And whatever resource we can share, we share. But we can't direct because it's somebody's private business.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Understood. Wow. So, Minister, first of all, I just want to thank everyone. We're at the end already. It's already 7 o'clock. Curfew's at 8. So I just want to really thank everyone for participating. It was an engaging conversation and for sharing your questions. Minister and Dr. McLean, you guys are doing a lot with the full team. And it was really a breath of fresh air just to hear the details and just how much has been accomplished and the plans on the horizon. So I want to thank, well, I'm not supposed to do the vote of thanks. I am now going to invite the acting permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Dr. Grace McLean, to give us a vote of thanks and close out this event. Thank you very much. And be big or go home. No, be bold or go home. Love that.
I was hoping that you would have gotten me off the hook there, Marianne. But unfortunately, yes, Minister, go big or go home. That's really another interesting, let's call it a tagline that has come out of this consultation, and that's historic. Keith, I want to thank you for the thought-provoking statistics that you put forward, which is really the end game. And the one that is particularly troubling for me in education, as an educator, is the 65% of the 1.2 million with no training or qualification. So that is the end game, and that would have triggered those areas that our minister outlined specifically. Education is just as technical as, let's say, engineering in terms of how you synthesize the different parts and how you put them together. And so our minister would have highlighted 4 key areas: accountability, character education, system-wide effectiveness, and continuous teacher in-service professional development. And so it is really how we are going to be packaging these areas so that we can start seeing the outcome. One of the things that our minister has consistently outlined is the outcome. So yes, you are doing so, and this is so wonderful. What is the outcome? What have you achieved? What percentage of the students would have attained the competence in this particular area? And so we now have to ensure that we kind of prepare that scorecard. You have actually outlined some key areas for partnership. Minister outlined about 3, which is the adopting of a school, the broadband support that you're already providing, looking specifically at employment possibilities, internship, summer program, even just mentoring and exposure for our students. The youth program you mentioned, which is the Youth Upliftment Through Education program, there is a roadmap, there is a document, it's a best practice that I think, Minister, we could engage the PSOJ to see how we could now advance that in a virtual world. And the interesting one, which Minister herself had discussed with us, is the sale and leaseback program. I think that is a wonderful opportunity for us to really start talking. So as we focus on ministers or the ministry's 3 top priorities right now within the next 6 months or so, the specialist teacher, the lesson plan repository, and the 7-year high school, we want to continue to engage the PSOJ as much as is possible. And so I look forward to the follow-up discussion at different levels so that when we come back here next year, Minister, we can say this is what we have on the PSOJ, Ministry of Education, Youth and Information scorecard. So I want to thank you, Keith, for this informative session this evening. Marion, thank you for ably taking us through. And Minister, thank you for the stellar maiden presentation. The work has begun for the JTA conference that is coming up in August, Minister, so it will be a little easier for us. And Minister, we are truly proud of you. As my first experience with a female minister, we are really proud of you, and we are motivated. I can speak for the entire team that we are motivated to move forward despite the hurdles. Let me also thank the other representatives from the PSOJ who are here. Thank you, Crystal Clear, for making the signal and the sound and the digital board clear. And we look forward, thank you, Tony, for signing, and we do look forward to not just having a feel-good event, but ensuring that we put in practice now what would have been suggested, and we can report to the Jamaican people that education is moving in the right direction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And please go home before the curfew begins.
We're in a rush to change the education system.
Bridging the digital divide is crucial.
The government of Jamaica, through the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, has been utilizing technology to enrich and improve the educational levels of its students and move towards a fully connected and knowledge-based society.
We have to protect and nurture our children. It is important to keep our youth engaged.
Thank you very much. Despite the challenges,
Improving the educational outcomes is our #1 priority.